in this case. Then we go to line 6. Now line 6 is a little bit mysterious, so we'll need some more explanation here. We take care of the easy part first. Okay, the easy part is every time you have an invocation, you have to allocate a column for return line number so that we know where to go back to when the subroutine is done. In this case, because the invocation is on line 6, line 7 is the line that is logically following line 6, so we just write down line 7 as our return line number. That's the easy part. The difficult part is, what do we write down for n? Now I know that I need to allocate column G for parameter n because that's the way it goes. Okay? A bi-val parameter is just like a local variable. Every time you invoke a subroutine, you have to allocate a new column for n in this case. The question is, what am I using to specify the initial value of column G? You have to look at this part of the invocation. N minus 1, right arrow, n. Okay, that's confusing. Okay, which n am I talking about?
Column E.
Okay, let's look at the n minus 1 part first. Let's look at the left-hand side of the right arrow. This n is specifying the n that we still know. The n that we already know is column E. So n minus 1 is 3 minus 1, which is 2. Okay? Now it kind of makes sense that the left-hand side of the right arrow, or this part, has to be referring to column E, because the other n, or column G, we don't have a value for it yet. Does it make sense? The right arrow is also a clue to tell you that we have to evaluate n minus 1 in order to figure out what initial value this n is going to have. So those things are kind of clues to tell you that we have to use column E to figure out what is n minus 1. N is 3, 3 minus 1 is 2, and that's why column G is going to have an initial value of 2. Okay, I'm going to stop here to see if anyone has any questions. Are we doing okay so far with this? Okay. Then what do we do? Where do we go back to? Where do we go to after we execute line 6? Go to the beginning of the subroutine again, which is line 3. N is less than or equal to 1. Is still false because n is 2 in this case. We go to line 6. We invoke the subroutine again. We allocate a column for return line number. It goes back to line 7. And we allocate another column for parameter n. Parameter n, this time, will have a value of 1. Can everybody see why column I has a value of 1? Because when we execute line 6, it specifies n minus 1 will be the initial value of n. The left-hand side of the right arrow is going to use the context that we still use at this point, not the context that we're constructing at this point. At this point, n still has a value of 2. 2 minus 1 is 1, and that's why 1 is used to specify the parameter n of column I. Is that okay? Because this part can be a little bit confusing because they are both variable n's. So now we go back to line 3. N is less than or equal to 1 is finally true because n, or column I, does have a value of 1 at this point. We go to we go to line 4 of the pseudocode. R is finally initialized to 1. Then we are done with the conditional statement. We go to line 9. We end the subroutine. When we get to the end of a subroutine, we look up the return line number column. We figure out we have to go to line 7 next. And then we deallocate everything, the return line number as well as the bi-val parameter. Is this part okay? Why we are getting rid of both the return line number and also the parameter? Basically, everything that you allocate for this invocation, you have to deallocate at the same time. Is that okay? What do we do on line 7? Look at line 7 of the pseudocode. We compute R, the product of R and N. N this time is now referring to G, column G, because column I is gone. Column G has a value of 2. R has a value of 1. 1 times 2 is 2. We store the 2 back into R. R is column C. Column C is now updated to 2. Are we doing okay? After line 7, we are out of the conditional statement. We get to the end of the subroutine on line 9. At the end of a subroutine, we look up the return line number. We say that we have to go back to line 7, and then we deallocate all the columns that we allocated for this invocation of the subroutine. And then where do we go? We go back to line 7 again. What does line 7 do? It computes the product of R and N. This time N is 3, or column E has a value of 3. R has a value of 2. 2 times 3 is 6. We store the 6 back into R, or column C. Column C is now updated to 6. We get out to line 9. We go to the return line number. We know that we are supposed to continue execution at post. And then we deallocate those 2 columns, and we're done. Do we have any questions about this trace? No questions? Have we changed anything that we have been doing so far? Have we changed the mechanisms of doing anything so far?
No, we just took out a step.
Well, we took out the one variable in the process. Yep. Oh, okay. I have to lower my sensitivity. Dial it down. Because I'm almost eager to see if people have any questions. Questions are good. Are we doing okay so far with this? Yes? Okay. And we have 10 minutes left to talk about the limitations of bi-val parameters. They are very useful for inputs, but they're not so useful for outputs. Okay? If you think about a subroutine as a cubicle or as an office, bi-val parameters are kind of like an in tray, okay? Except it's not really exactly an in tray. It's a copier. Okay. Let me just draw you a picture of in tray. A tray for something to come into an office. Okay, so I'm going to draw a picture of an office, okay, or a desk, someone who's going to. Okay, so this is a person behind the desk, and this is a subroutine. You can ask a subroutine to do things, okay? Well, you cannot really do anything. You can say subroutine start execution. That's about all you can do. Except in this case, we also have a particular in tray. And in our example like this, the in tray itself has a name. It is called N. But there's one caveat to this whole thing. This is not exactly an in tray. An in tray implies that if someone gives you a document through the in tray, you'll be working with that same document. And when you're done with that document, you can give the original document back to that person. Okay? But in this case, it's not exactly an in tray. It's more like a copier. Okay? When someone wants you to process a form, that person will put the original copy onto this, quote-unquote tray here. Push a button, bing, and the person behind the counter is going to work with a copy of whatever this piece of paper has. Okay? So keep this in mind when we look at this new example. The new example is going to be, this is a swap subroutine. it requires two parameters. It requires parameter x, it requires parameter y, and also a local variable t. And all it does is to exchange the values of x and y, okay, which is some of the things that we did in the exam. So we'll say t gets a copy of x, x gets a copy of y, y gets a copy of t, and define sub. Outside of the subroutine, we have two global variables. Let's say we have I. Oh, okay, it's replacing the I with something else. Okay, let's use m and n. M starts with the value of 5, n starts with the value of 16, doesn't matter what it is. We invoke swap, and we can say that we use m to specify the parameter x, we use n to specify the parameter y, and we'll go ahead and see what happens when this code executes. Once again, we don't need a column. We don't need a column for comments because there are no conditions to evaluate here. We start with line number. We have two global variables, m and n. The precondition is we don't know anything about either. On line 11, it initializes n to 16. Oops, m to 5. On line 12, no wonder. M gets initialized to 5. On line 11, n gets initialized to 16. And then on line 12, we invoke the subroutine. Okay. At this time, we should know exactly what happens when you invoke a subroutine with local variables as well as by-value parameters. First of all, we deal with the return line number. Since line 12 is the last line of the program, the return line number is post. That's easy. X is a by-value parameter, Y is a by-value parameter, and T is a local variable. T is because it is a local variable, it starts with an unknown value. Question mark puts here. X and Y, on the other hand, are by-value parameters. Their initial values are specified by the invoke statement. You look at line 12, the invoke statement. M is used to specify X. M has a value of 5. That's why X is also going to start with a value of 5. N has a value of 16, and that's why Y will also end up with a value of 16. Are we okay so far? Okay. Now we get into the subroutine, and then we just shuffle things around a little bit in this subroutine. The subroutine itself is not very exciting. What is exciting is the very end of the execution. Okay. The subroutine starts with line 5. Line 5 says we want to make a copy of X and make T a copy of X. So T now has a value of 5. We go to line 6. We copy the value of Y to X. Y has a value of 16. X is now updated to a value of 16. We go to line 7. Y gets a value from T. Y is now getting the value of 5 from T. So far, so good. Did I exchange the values of X and Y? Yep, works perfectly. And then we get to line 8. What are we going to do? Well, first of all, we have to remember where we are going to. We're going to post, because that's what the return line number is telling me. And then what do? We put everything into the shredder. Like that. Did I end up exchanging the values of n or m? The global variables m and n. Why not?